Good morning. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us today. Today we're going to talk about how to end the drama on your team and how to then retain your top talent. So we got team members, people who are on our team. Everyone honestly really deserves a fighting chance, at re-energizing and kind of reconnecting with their uh with their work that they're doing, right? And forgive me, I'm going to admit some new people. Okay. And so today what I want to talk about and advanced slides. Today, what we're going to cover is I'm going to go a little bit into my background, right? So, how did I land into this work? Why do I care about doing this work and caring so much about the generations and how the future of work, how does that progress along? So, we'll get into what generational diversity is, as well as talk through why you should care, why this matters in the workforce today. So, I'm going to share with you some pretty alarming metrics that are going to I think really kind of get us into understanding what the current state is. And then I'm going to tactically give you some generational traits, right? Because we have assumptions of what we believe each of the generations are part of, right? What are maybe what they value, how they prefer to communicate, right? I think we carry around a couple of these, in our back pocket when we're kind of interrelating. But I also too want to be able to talk through maybe what's causing some of the friction, and then specifically give you some strategies on how to navigate that space. Okay. And then if you stick around to the end, of course, we're going to certainly cover some Q&A. So if you've got any questions at all, please pop them in the chat, and I'll be taking them afterwards. But I also too want to be able to offer you some free goodies. So I've got some, if you stick around, I will offer that to you as well as some of the things that you'll see pop up as we go through our discussion today. All right. I see. Okay. Thank you very much. All right. So next, let me give you a little background about me. So I've spent over 2 decades going throughout my career, moving from rookie into experienced, right? Navigating and leading diverse, high stakes team within the healthcare industry. I have done that poorly for the first part of my career and started recognizing what this looks like. How do we actually start to come together and start to, really bring the generations together, hearing multiple points of view in order for us to be able to truly excel at the work that we do. And I've been specializing in multi-generational trainings, and some have called me the multi-generational whisperer, if you will. It's because I understand and I'll tell you a little bit more about me, is that I'm a Zennial. So I am one of those people who are on the cusp. I am in the middle between Gen X and Millennials. And oh, there we go. And so there's a lot of benefits to being that hybrid, to kind of understanding. Let's see here. Sorry, some alerts keep popping up for me. So I have been focused on leadership development when I left corporate about 2, 3 years ago. And I've been focusing on multi-generational communication and what that looks like moving into this space and how it is that we can start to work together. Okay, waiting some more. Okay, so along that path, I ditched the grind, right? The corporate grind about 2, 3 years ago. So I can help leaders that are just like you, right? Who don't know what this looks like within in their space. They don't know what the telltale signs are related to understanding what is truly a disconnect and where you might need to separate from staff and what actually is probably a bridge, right? It's a call for help. It's an opportunity for us to be able to really bring the team together to be more collaborative by accepting the generational differences that exist. All right, so generational diversity. This is the textbook term, but essentially all it means is how it is that we were raised, what influenced our current perspective, our point of view, and how has that shaped the work that we do and our approach to much of that, right? So what is the lens in which we view everything? We know that boomers, Gen X, Zennials, Millennials, Gen Z, they do not see the world the same, and there are good reasons for that, right? And also too, there's benefit in that diversity. Okay, that didn't work. All right, so now I want to talk a little bit about whether or not you're experiencing any of these things in your environment, right? So whether or not you're a leader or you're individual contributor, we've likely experienced some of these in our environments. So, right, where there's been team miscommunication is slowing down your projects. You've seen others who are either pulling away, they're going off and doing their own thing. They are just disengaged from the process. And perhaps you're just not quite sure what's causing it. Well, it could likely be a generational bias, right? You're also too maybe losing great talent. I remember when I exited healthcare, I was noticing that there were quite a few people who were leaving the organization. And I've noticed this throughout my career. Sometimes it has to do with the environment, sometimes it has to do with the leader, and it also too could mean that perhaps maybe the interracial, excuse me, inter um, generational relationships are not strong enough to keep people there. Okay. Maybe you're struggling to keep your team motivated and excited about some new initiatives or projects, right? So when you've got new directives coming down from leadership, how is the team kind of accepting that, right? Approaching new perspectives with some of your projects. Are they excited and energized about it? Or are they really just waiting for the assignment and being told what to do, right? So kind of engaged and not truly bought into the process. Maybe you want a culture where everyone feels valued. You are a leader who wants to make sure that people are feeling connected to one another, that this is not just independent work. We are not just widget makers. We're not here to just check off a box, that we actually want to be bought into the work that we're doing, right? So you want to create this balanced community of managing those diverse needs, as well as keeping everybody on the same page without it feeling overwhelming. And I can hear many of you saying, and I've received many of these questions before, how do I balance the needs of all of the generations, from communication styles to how people like to be recognized? How do I bring all of this together? There are some strategies that I'm going to share with you today that I think can start you along that journey. Okay. Now, and of course, all of this is causing friction between your team, right? Because we have some who are saying, well, that's not how things should be done, or that's not how things have been done, or I have new perspectives on how we can do these things. All of these are just basically fighting points between one another. They're breaking the communication within your team. So let's start to fix that today. All right, so I told you there were some alarming numbers, right, around what this looks like within the environment. One of them is at the very minimum is $150 billion. This is actually costing US companies due to disengaged employees. And I actually refreshed this number this morning that recent data is actually trending at 1.9 trillion. That is enormous. So think about the disengagement. People who are not raising their hand, who perhaps maybe before were excited to do the work, but today they're staying quiet, right? We start to put labels on this. It kind of looks a little bit like quiet quitting, which we'll talk about in a little bit, which is just essentially stepping back and saying, I'm going to do the bare minimum. So disengaged employees are not volunteering for work. They're not being innovative and creative in this space. They're not bringing their greatness to that role simply because they feel either silenced, unseen, not valued. And all of this is impacting your culture, right? From a bottom line perspective, the dollars are there. It's costing your companies greatly to not be able to leverage or lean into this space, right? We know that with new generations, we've got an opportunity to start to leverage the collaborative or the collective groupthink and how it is that we approach the work that we're doing. Excuse me. 75% next year, right? We have a couple days until next year. 75% of the US workforce will be millennials and Gen Z, right? Feel as you want to about that. That just means that we have an evolving workforce that is moving into leadership positions. We have Gen Zs who are stepping into leadership and running companies. And just for the statistics, the oldest Gen Z is actually 27. And I don't know about you, but at 27, I actually was doing quite big things in my life. And so, but I also too was part of Gen X or Zennials. And so we may not be as welcoming to think that actually someone in in their 20s, right? Perhaps maybe our children's age can run a company, right? Can run a startup, can know everything from start to finish. This is where bringing the generations together, right? Bringing the experience of things that have been done, identifying how we can bridge them to how could we approach this issue today, right? So bringing that, this is where the value of bringing the generations together and understanding how to do that is critical to your success. Next is it's anywhere from 50% to 200%, depending on the role of what that turnover costs your company due to disengagement. So if you have to rehire any of those staff, any of those positions, this is everywhere, anyone from frontline staff to middle management to senior management, right? When you have disengaged staff, this is what it's costing your companies to replace them, right? Or to deal with the loss of productivity. And 35% of workplace conflicts are rooted in these generational misunderstandings, right? There is just look at communications, for example, right? Have you ever been told, okay, boomer, right? Or not everything requires an email, or why didn't you just send me a message on Teams or on Slack or whatever your applications are? These are telltale signs that your team's not communicating. That, and perhaps maybe we need to have a conversation about how we best utilize our tools in order to be able to land on the same page, to get everyone actually moving in the same direction, existing in the same ecosystem. All right, was any of these numbers alarming to any of you? Just put it in the chat if what was most alarming or what did you already know? I want to hear from you. So go ahead and put in the chat as I advance. Okay. Now, I want to tell you here are some telltale signs. These are things that your staff may be saying, right? That you might hear other teammates saying, maybe across departments, maybe within even other organizations, right? But these are the things that people are saying, and this is what leaders are assuming, what they're hearing through these words, right? So things like, why are we doing it their way? So their way is applying that there is a judgment, right, outside of your group. So perhaps maybe leaning into why are we leaning into, the new ideas? Why do we have to consider refreshing or doing something differently? This has always worked, right? Or why did they get to lead and I'm taking a back seat? Nobody asked for my input. This is a standard cry for why am I not having a voice in this space, right? And when people stop speaking is also a telltale sign, right? Because when those who used to be involved and vocal in these events, now they're pulled away and they're reserving their voice in that space, might mean that they feel that they are not heard, that they are drawn out, right? Oh, and thank you, Shannon. So you knew that the millennials and Gen Zs were going to be 75% of the workforce. Well, right, 75 has seemed a bit higher than I also too thought. I thought it was going to be about more like 50. And I think specifically in the healthcare industry, it's going to be at least 50%, and I think 75 by 2030. So absolutely. How about I feel like my efforts are invisible? Do you have team members, or are you stuck doing work that you feel is maybe down in the totem pole, right? Has no visibility. You feel like there's no career path, there's no opportunity for growth. So you are constantly feeling like you're doing a work that no one's going to ever see or read or review, or you'll never receive any accolades for. And we don't do the work that we do to receive the recognition perhaps, but it would be nice to know that there is an appreciation for our efforts, right? So, do we really need all of this training, right? So depending on what industry you're in healthcare, highly overregulated. So we've got tons and tons of trainings, but in other industries as well. Why do people feel that they are constantly being stuck in doing, having to take on new trainings, right? Having to do new things and learn new skills? Why are they getting all the opportunities? It sounds like judgment, right? Or it sounds like jealousy. But this is actually saying, I want an opportunity to step up, to lead, to be able to be seen and visible in that space. But I'm not feeling like I have the opportunity to do so, right? So they're feeling truly behind the scenes. Next, now, why is this team so stuck in the past, right? This is the judgment around whether or not you're feeling like things are being done correctly, right? So I hear this often with maybe with the Gen Z folks, perhaps is why do we still use email when we have, Teams channels and or we have Slack, we have Discord, we have all of these other tools, right? So you may hear this with maybe, and it's a perspective to just knowing how to leverage other tools that perhaps we haven't been exposed to. And then lastly, another example is just nobody ever explains the big picture, right? In order for people to feel connected to the work that they're doing, they have to be able to connect the work that they do at their desk to the higher objectives and strategies at the higher level for the entire organization. Good leaders are really crafty at being able to identify not only their department goals, right? Their functional areas, their department goals, but down to each desk to be able to help them understand. You may feel like you're a grain of sand on the beach, right? But there's a quote from a janitor at NASA. And when someone asked him, "What do you do?" He says, "I put people on the moon." Right? I send people into space. And why did he say that? That's because he has very clear understanding and connection to the goals and objective, the mission, the vision of NASA. It's not that he does it by sweeping floors, right, or changing out trash cans. He recognizes that he is part of a larger ecosystem. He knows how he fits in his world. Now, another thing here is what do leaders assume, right? So when they hear any of these things, they are assuming that perhaps maybe there's just a lack of motivation, that their staff is not bought in to the big picture, when there actually may be a breakdown in communication, right? And understanding what that looks like. They don't know how they fit into the big picture. They feel that perhaps maybe there's a disconnect in skills, that they don't know how to send emails. They don't know how to create, presentations. Maybe they need more training, right? Why do we have to keep doing all of this training? So they're leaning in to solve potentially a problem that doesn't exist, and they're running over the most obvious one, which is that you actually perhaps just need to ask your teams where the gaps are, right? Where are the disconnects? Where are they feeling left behind? Where are they feeling unseen? Or some take it personal and think that this is a lack of respect, right? I have been interviewing people for quite some time now, and a couple of things that I'm finding is that between the generations, there is this uh, perception of respect between, and I'll use Gen X as an example, between Gen X and Gen Z, right? Why would you be texting, in front of me to talk to somebody else who's sitting next to you? We would interpret that as being rude, right? And you're not only because you're not providing a contribution to the presence, right, to the present space, but you're also too talking to somebody else, who is sitting in the same environment. That would be perceived as rude. And so perhaps maybe others are thinking the same thing. I sent you an email and you responded with a Slack response, right? So this is where the disconnect, this is definitely related to generational bias, right? And those barriers that we hold true to, right? And And that's mentioned too. So, what also are part of these challenges is that we're not addressing the communication gaps within our generations. Even in our hierarchy, we're not allowing the free flow of information. So, in many ways, many organizations are gatekeeping both information as well as access and exposure to tools and environments that can cultivate this environment that you're looking for. The inequitable policies, right? So perhaps maybe we're where we are rewarding some over others, just, inherently to how business has always been done, right? For example, how PTO is utilized, right, at various levels. And then also too our cultural misalignment. So this is your culture within your environment, right? So not just racially motivated, but also too how are you perpetuating the culture that you want to see your teams demonstrate, your leaders demonstrate within your company. Okay, and see, no questions, so I'll move on. So, how much is this team drama actually costing you? So, I'm gonna keep throwing these figures at you because this is really a problem. This is the bleed. If you're not quite sure why performance is low, why productivity is low, why your team morale is low, why you have high turnover, and what those costs are, your administrative costs are really high, it could be the fact that you've got generational barriers or biases that are at play that are not being addressed, right? So 450 billion, as I mentioned earlier, due to disengagement and loss of productivity and innovation. People are not showing up and giving you their best simply because they're not feeling valued and seen. And one way to address that is to understand, speak into their listening, understand how to communicate with them. Poor team morale and trust, right? We hear this term around psychological safety and building psychological safety, not only within your team, with your teammates, but you've got to be able to understand how people learn, how people work, what they value, and that's where we're going to go in today, based on the generations. 34% in lost productivity, 44% in project delays, right? Think of what that looks like for you if you're in IT space, if you're in healthcare, if you're in entertainment, and what does a delay cause with with your project? What does that look like, right? So if you had 44%, right, maybe even conservatively more like 18 or 20% of delays in your project, that is impacting your bottom line from an admin cost as well as from other resources that you might contract with, right? And then any loss in sales, right? So 18% of loss in sales, so not able to execute simply because perhaps people are not willing to take it across the finish line. They're not looking to execute because they're not bought into the reason why, right? And then your turnover costs. So recruitment, your onboarding, your training, this is highly impactful. We don't spend enough time thinking about what the employee journey is, both from moving from the hiring perspective to onboarding to training. How do they get bought into the culture within your organization? These breakdowns, they lead to burnout, right? We hear this. I saw a beautiful quote earlier today that said, something to the effect of burnout is caused by no longer being bought into the direction or the vision of the work you were doing, no longer enjoying that work. I completely agree, right? When you are feeling connected to the work you're doing, how many times have you burnt that candle at both ends? No problem, right? You may have felt it for times after, excuse me, but it felt meaningful. It felt like there was an impact, that there was something you could see at the other end. It also leads to disengagement, as we've discussed, and quiet quitting, right? People pulling back and saying, I'm just going to give the minimum necessary in order for me, one, to not raise any alarms, but I'm just going to do my job. They can no longer have the best of me, the essence of all I bring to this organization. Okay, so our goal today is going to be my goal is with everyone who I work with, every company I work with, every leader, every individual contributor, is to help you to save time, money, but most importantly, frustration. The burden of being exhausted in your role is incredible. It's immeasurable, right? It shows up in so many ways. It shows up in extra therapist visits. It shows up at, you know, more nights, having wine with your friends, right? Commiserating about the challenges, right? More visits to the quote water cooler, right? Where you are commiserating around the things that did not happen, how things should be done, right? These are unproductive time, but it's also too, the burden is really high emotionally on you. I want to empower you to confidently lead a motivated, aligned, and high-performing multi-generational team because most of us either are currently working on a multi-generational team or a blended generational team, or we have done so in the past, right? With the workforce being blended as it is, there's no escaping this, right? Unless your team is truly small, everyone is essentially is touched by this. Even my team is representative of at least two generations, right? And so that is my goal today. Now, let me give you a little bit of background about me, about why I actually care about this work, right? So, why do I care about trying to get the generations on the same page and speaking the same language and communicating? Well, so at the start of my career, and this is a photo of me when I started my career in healthcare, right? I was harassed by two women who I'm sure meant well, but their approach with me was really, really toxic. And I was hired from a temp position. So I moved from a temp position to being hired on. They created a position and continued to promote within the department from there. And I think they saw this as cheating, right? That I didn't go through normal channels. I didn't go through an employee pool. I mean, the department even put me through a 15-person at once panel interview, which I would say, please don't ever do that to anyone. That's highly intimidating. And at the time, I was pregnant. So I was 22. I was unmarried and I was still in college. And they had a lot to say about all of those things. And I know that, depending on our background, we carry judgments for many different reasons, but they don't belong in the workplace. And many times they can come out in how it is that we treat others, right? I was the lowest person on the totem pole, right? I was answering phones in the disease management department and having a great time at that. So I was an easy target because I was the newest person in the department. I was treated like a threat rather than a colleague. And I had my work ethic called into to question every single day. And I was held to unreasonable standards just by those two. Now, in the background, and you may have seen a post that I had about this recently, these were two women who whatever their intentions were, they greatly impacted the way that I experienced early on in my healthcare career. I had been working before this, but doing more freelance work, but coming into a corporate setting, this really, this, this really impacted me. But what this slide doesn't tell you is that there were eight other women who were part of that department who were collaborative, they were supportive, they were mentors for me. And what I decided was it was time for me to make a decision. Was I going to listen to just those people, those two women who had their own agenda, their own intentions in trying to maybe derail my career, but perhaps maybe to have a vocalized opinion about my career and my trajectory? Or was I going to listen to those eight, lean into the positive, and start to understand how I can exist within that space and grow, right? So I realized that I was representing a new wave of doing things, and that was threatening, right? And I get it. They didn't want things to change, but it didn't mean that they didn't have to. It didn't mean that there wasn't an opportunity to compromise and collaborate. So I was caught in this generational swirl, if you will, right? And I'm thinking that maybe some of this sounds familiar to many of us and how it is that we've experienced our careers and the evolution. So this is no different than what we're seeing today. So now I want to get into, we're going to spend some time on this slide. This is a quick snapshot of how to understand all of the generations, right? And we're just picking a couple areas for you to focus on, but I want you to notice the constant above. It has to do with the representation of computers, right? So we'll use that as a tool, an analogy to understand maybe the context behind in the workplace at least, how the generations were working together, right? So with boomers, the introduction of a personal computer, a desktop computer, was introduced around mid-career, right? So they had already worked, 15, 20 years into their career before they started leveraging a computer. Now, if many of you remember the first computers, right? The blinking cursor, DOS prompt, right? This is this is what the computer looked like then. Moving into Gen X. Gen X started to see desktop computers, started to have computer class in high school. And depending on where you fall within the generation, but that's around the time that you started to see an introduction there. Zennials, we started to see a blend, right? So the introduction of the computer, some, depending on your socioeconomic status, had access to a computer in the home. And then some also too had it either in the libraries, right? Or in college. So think about writing a term paper, right? You didn't necessarily do it at home. You went to another location, most of us. I'll say I did. I was spent a lot of time in the library typing out my papers, my essays. Now, millennials, uh, they started seeing the computer became normal in junior high, right? So this is taking it 4 years sooner than many of the prior generations. And then Gen Z, I want you to think about that how the evolution has moved from this desktop. Remember, the first computer was an enormous computer that filled up an entire room, perhaps an entire floor in an office building, right? And they have to stay in these coolers and in a temperature controlled room. And now I'm getting out of my lane because that I don't understand. But we now have evolved from that to desktops to being able to your flat screens, right? Flat hard drives to laptops to now technology and computers are in your hand, right? Our phones are mini computers, the tablets we use. And think about how now even the next generation, Generation Alpha, they have no recollection of the existence of computers never happening, right? They don't know what a black and white TV is or when TV was colorized and how to use a card system, card filing system at a library. Everything is now electronic. Now, this is foundational to understanding how it is that now then the generations have evolved over time and how do they communicate, right? What do they value? The context of the computers is helpful with understanding what was going on at the time, right? How they like feedback and also too, what is the root cause of some of this drama, right? Because where are the breakdowns in the communications within your organizations, within the teams? They are rooted with, and I was having a conversation just a couple weeks ago with a friend of mine, and we were talking about, think about the distance that it would take, right? Just use writing a paper as an example, right? And using technology that I just outlined here. How long did it take, perhaps maybe the boomers, to draw up a term paper? Think about what that looked like. It probably was extensive research. So, perhaps maybe class lecture, research you would check out a stack of books. You would go through the index to perhaps maybe find keywords. You would read the entire book. You would go through each of those steps. You would put together your notes. You would start to type it out or perhaps maybe write it out, right? So if you had access to a computer or if you were using a typewriter, I remember in high school using an electronic typewriter to type out all of my papers, right? Now, think about how the steps that and if you look at that in distance, right, in time, how long it would take you to complete that paper. Let's just be generous and say maybe it was 2 weeks, right? Probably more like a semester because you'd get assigned a 10, 15, 20 term paper that you needed to write. Now, I want you to now look at what that looks like for Gen Z, right? Gen Z has access to an infinite amount of information. We are in the information age. Everything is available through either a Google search, a ChatGPT search. Research can be done in the snap of a finger, right? You can also well, which ethically I don't agree with, you can write a term paper, and they are doing that, right? So, and I know some of my audience also too feel very strongly about that. So just know we are aligned. But what I would tell you is think about the time that it takes to complete the same task, where what would have taken weeks can now take minutes, perhaps even just a few short hours. You could turn it around in a day. And I think that that is also to some of the root cause to the perception of respect, right? It's the respect for the journey that we've had to be on, that we've had to take in order to be able to do life, life, to experience work, and how in the journey that it takes for us to complete a task. There is a loss of understanding of what that duration looks like, or what the uh, the time that it's taken us to complete each of those tasks, because there's not been an experience, there's not been an exposure, right? Every generation has essentially cut back on that time that it takes to be able to create the paper. Probably in the future, there won't be term papers because the whole point it will have been lost, right? Because we know that the exercise of going to college, for example, to do certain things, take certain classes, is to learn the discipline to do it. And this is where I believe that there starts to be a split in the generations, right? Is that it took me, think about how many times your parents have told you, I used to have to walk to school barefoot in snow for 2 miles, blah, blah, blah. There is no difference to that in the term paper. And it's what it's calling for is just a respect for the journey, a respect for the time it has taken for those before us to do something that seems very trivial today, right? Even from entertainment perspective, we have access to streaming services. If anybody remembers TiVo, you would record your show so you could watch it later. Now you can stream it at any time, right? So this is where when you start getting people talking about their views, not everybody has the same viewpoint simply because of exposure. And so the charge that I have is to get people to start talking and start appreciating the position and the perspective of others. Not that we have to compromise on everything, and we don't have to agree on everything either. But when you understand where people are coming from, with what they value, with how it is that they prefer to be communicated with. Now, this is all also too, I don't want to say very stereotypical, but this is kind of like the happy path, right? This is the baseline across all the generations. And I can hear some of you saying, oh, well, I'm perhaps maybe millennials and emails are cool with me, right? Or I'm a Gen X and I love getting just instant messages, right? Slack has been a savior on my team. All of that can exist because what this doesn't account for is personality and individual uniqueness, right? And skill. So this is more of a guide to say if you have a team, if you are leading a team, if you are part of a team and you want to know how to start to approach some of your relationships, this is a good place to start, right? So I've spoken a lot for here for just a minute. I want to take a break to see, are there any questions that are coming up that you specifically want to ask about this chart or any of the generations or any insights? If not, then I'll move on to strategies. Okay. I don't see anything in the chat. So pop up if a question comes up. Okay, next now let's get into how to leverage your generational diversity as a superpower. Now, there are there are almost an infinite number of potential strategies. These are the ones that I have found to be very helpful. And I want to give you some background on a couple Fortune 500 companies, if you will, who've actually already started doing this. This is a key differentiator between you and your market. So if you start to lean in these areas, this is how you not only retain, but also start to attract, right? The top talent that you're looking for. This does not mean that this is the strategy to win Gen Z. No, this is the strategy to have a culture that is supportive of having a blended generational culture and accepting that, right? So one of them is to create generational listening sessions. This is where folks can come together and talk about what their preferences are. How do they prefer to work? How do they prefer to communicate? What challenges are they seeing? Because these sessions are meant to start to kind of air a bit of the dirty laundry, or really the energy, right? Like the things that people are not talking about. This also too can lead to establishing, perhaps maybe some communication guidelines, right? Saying we're going to use these tools for these things. Emails are going to be leveraged for really important information that needs to be memorialized, right? Slack is going to be for instant messaging, right? And then many other tools, depending on what you've got access to. And PepsiCo is using this, right? They're hosting workshops for inclusivity. Now, here's what I would say. This does not have to be led. Don't think that this is something that you as a leader have to specifically take on yourself. This can be something. This is something that you can actually take a step forward in and allowing your teams to lead themselves. Oh, I see a question. Bob. Um, who bought his first IBM PC in 1981, gives me an insight to what to look for in common points of conversation. Fabulous. Thank you very much for that feedback, Bob. And as a side note, actually, this is going to be part of that chart is going to be part of what I share with all of you because you attended today. Quickly, because I'm running out of time, I'm going to go through these others. Use a variety of tools, of course, right? So Slack for quick updates and emails. I think I just mentioned this. Reverse mentorship program. This actually is really, really, really impactful. Procter and Gamble's using this. Many others are as well. So think of it as where it's not just yeah, a Gen X who's mentoring a millennial, or this is reverse. So this is actually looking at it from the lens of we need to perhaps innovate in a new space, right? We need to start to think about how it is that we bring new applications or we start to approach our process from a different perspective. So leveraging the thought process of somebody who maybe has not been immersed in your industry for decades, right? Because we can become conditioned to say, I know in healthcare, nothing moves fast, right? And so that's my view because I've been in healthcare for 25 years. But somebody who has just entered the industry, perhaps maybe there's an insight that I'm not seeing, and I'd love to hear that. So the reverse mentorship, right? So it doesn't just have to be around innovation. It can just be around perspective and your approach to new ideas. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that, Shannon and David. Next is an implement a flexible work arrangement. Now, this is also too dependent on your industry, right? And your company. But this needs to come from the top down at the HR level. But when you start having these listening sessions, when you start responding, how many of you have filled out an employee engagement survey? And you go through the same 20 or so questions and it has to do with whether or not you're excited or, you strongly agree with this or that. What if there was an added question on there where people were truly trying to lean into understanding where do you think that we might have opportunity to leverage the richness of the generations that are represented across your organizations, right? And to perhaps either hold a town hall, maybe to look for volunteers to be part of a workshop or a focus group where we talk about these opportunities to bring the organization forward, to start considering flexibility and how it is that work is being done, right? We've all fallen into this 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. work mentality. And much of that is due to Henry Ford, right? The production line. And we used to work 7 days a week, and then sad Sundays was declared the Sabbath and not right for us to be working. And so then it was 6 days a week, but this Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. This is, well, I will say every industry is different. And I'll tell you, when you consider that you have the power to reclaim flexibility of what this looks like for your team, for your organization, then start with the assumptions. The assumption is that work can only be done Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, at this place, during this time. Well, when you approach it and you start actually having a group conversation, right? Ask your people where they would like to see flexibility. There are people who want to physically come into an office because it provides great structure. It gives them access to other people. There are people who would prefer to be in their home and never talk to anybody over the phone and just communicate over messaging. There's an opportunity to find a compromise, right? And that it doesn't have to be a one size fits all. And this is not necessarily a solution for everybody, but it starts the conversation. Okay. Great movie. Robert De Niro, who is a retired intern working in the same building when he was employed in his 30s to 60s. Thank you, Bob. Absolutely. I'll have to check that one out. Okay, next is to provide real-time feedback tools. So as you saw on the chart before this, that there are some generations who want to have they want to have quickly and timely feedback, right? They want to know how things are going. And perhaps maybe some and other generations are like, please don't come for me. I don't really want to deal with this on a regular basis. I'm used to and conditioned to performance reviews, and that's all I want to deal with. And that's fine depending on the needs of your organization. Also, to be flexible in how it is that your people might want to receive feedback because you don't want to run a full race to find out that you were disqualified, right? You don't want to run a marathon to say, oh, you disqualified because you misstepped or you stepped out of a line or did this or that, right? Quickly, right? Be the ref in an NBA game, right? Call it right then and there. Some people want that. Others want to see your stats over the entire season, right? And to know what that looks like for you moving into the next season, okay? Flexibility, and there are tools that you can leverage to do this. It doesn't have to be hard. All right, rotate leadership opportunities. This is critical. People will love this if they get an opportunity, especially those who are saying, why wasn't my voice considered? What weren't I considered for this thing, for this opportunity, right? When you cycle people into the opportunities, right? New initiatives, new projects to either be the lead or to perhaps maybe companion with the lead, right? To be somebody who's a trusted advisor in that role. Think about how you might be able to leverage your team, leverage the experience, leverage the point of view, right? And think about how things are being done and where you can approach this differently now. And then an advisory board. This is awesome. This is entirely led by your staff. This is where they're getting together not to complain about all of the wrongdoings of leadership, but to be constructive in how it is that they speak and represent the rest of the organization from a generational perspective to where there are opportunities, right? I could see that your HR will also to potentially be part of this or a sponsor with supporting much of this, but this does require leadership, sponsorship, and support throughout the organization to give this the levity and the weight that it needs. Okay, I'm going to keep going. So I'm running out of time. So imagine this, right? If you could reduce the miscommunications on your team, you could retain your top talent. You could turn your generational differences truly into your greatest strengths because your teams are your greatest asset. If you could build a motivated, high-performing team that tackles those challenges together, and you as the leader do not have to be at this alone. I know what that feels like to feel like you have to solve everything yourself. What if you could do all of that and you could lead confidently, knowing that you've created a culture that is not only building trust, respect, but it's also to aligning folks. When you do this, you bring people back to the same page. You get them rowing in the same direction. You get them supporting your business objectives, right? This you can have all of this without the frustration, right? You take baby steps to get there. When people start feeling that there is an authenticity that they're being approached with, that there's a genuine place of care and respect and value for them in the organization, you'd be surprised what people, the rocks that people will overturn, right, in order to make things happen, right? You do not have to have the high turnover, that not only from an admin expense, but also to thinking about the energy. What does that do to the morale and the trust, the psychological safety within your team if people are constantly leaving, right? It's a revolving door, right? Without the constant tension and the conflict, and then without feeling like you have to micromanage your team, right? Or overcompensate for that misalignment. All of this is possible when you start to address some of the generational barriers, the issues, right? These are more metrics to support, right? Why you need to pay attention to this today, why this is not something that you can or should wait until tomorrow, right? Because if you think that you can wait, these numbers are only going up, right? 21% of engaged teams are more profitable, right? That means more sales, that means more business, that means continued growth. 41% of your engaged employees will exhibit lower absenteeism, right? So this is not meaning that they're not pulling on their paid time off, but they're also too, they're leveraging that, but they're not calling in sick, right? They're not underperforming simply because or stepping into that quiet quitting role. All right. Now, so here's my offer. So let's fix this together, right? This is what I do all day, every day. I work with organizations to help combat many of these problems. And we start small because not everything actually in change does not come very quickly because the root of all of this is managing the change. And the great way to do this is to stair step, is to start with a conversation, to understand truly where your biggest opportunities are. How are you experiencing some of these challenges today? Where is the bleed within your organization, right? Is it in your sales? Is it in your loss of productivity? Is it in your attrition rate? All of these things we can start to stop the bleed and start to reverse it, right? Simply by taking some of these steps to acknowledge and bring awareness to the issues that exist. So there's a QR code here. If you want to book time with me, feel free to use that. And my calendar is opening in January to support some of these conversations. But I would love to welcome you to schedule some time with me and let's talk through what this looks like. This is a free consultation, right? Tell me what some of your challenges are, answer a couple questions, and then let's get on the phone. I want to help you put together a game plan, right? Can we identify what some of your challenges are and start to put together a roadmap for success? So, what does that look like moving forward? So now with a couple minutes left, I want to open up to any questions. So I'm going to open this chat here real quickly. Any questions that anyone has around generational barriers, diversity, and how to be able to implement some of these things? All right, is there a good way to start to implement reverse mentorship? Very good question, David. Um, so I would say it all starts with asking questions, right? So asking your teams what it looks like, where do they think maybe the biggest challenges are? Because in doing this work, I find that most people are not aware that the generational differences are what are impacting some of their challenges. So when you start first with understanding what the problems are, then you start to figure out what the root causes are, and then one of the solutions is figuring out, okay, is reverse mentoring the right solution for that problem? So it starts with understanding the challenges first and then being able to assign what the potential solutions are. All right, I see no more questions here. Then thank you everyone very much for your time today. Lastly, this is if you want to book some time with me, also too, if you aren't able to get to this, then go ahead and send me a message or an email. I'll be happy to connect with you. But thank you everyone for your time today. Have a lovely rest of your week and a great holiday. I'll see you in January. Thank you, everybody.